I just realized I was muted. Sorry. New microphone.
No worries.
Donated by a kind person. Through the prayers of Holy Fathers, which Jesus Christ, we God mercy us and save us. Amen. Good evening. For those new here, my name is Father Joseph Swaden. I've worked in Orthodox apologetics since 1998, and I'm the founder of NFT, True Orthodox, and Ecumenical News since 2004. We've been in the apologetic space on Facebook since 2016 and on YouTube since 2018. And if you appreciate what we do here, please like and subscribe. Tonight, we're here to continue a conversation we began a few months ago with Elijah Yassi from Underground Catholicism. And with that, if you can take a minute to introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me on, Father. Elijah Yassi, as you said, Underground Catholicism is my channel's name. This is our third one, right? We've done Immaculate Conception, Papacy, and then now Papacy Part 2. Kind of all flowed from
Immaculate Conception. Thank you for that, Sunrise, for that donation. Again, anyone can come help with a donation. Throw in a super chat. We really appreciate it. Elijah, one minor correction. We did do a discussion, I think, on the Immaculate Conception, but I think that was on another channel and it might have been deleted.
No, I think it was on my channel. It should be there.
So. Oh, okay. Then I could be wrong. Okay. Well, if you want to get a chance to watch that, you can. Give me just a moment, because that's not a bad idea. And I am just going to take this off here. All right. In that case, so basically what we kind of did here last time is we were having a discussion on the papacy. We didn't get to the central question that I wanted to get to today, and today is going to be more of a, I guess on your part, more of a kind of a more of an explanation of why you feel the papacy is necessary. And so, in any case, I'd like to let me see here. There's a lot of we have a lot of Christ is born and glorify Him. It is the middle of the 12th day, almost the end of the 12 days of Christmas, which ends with Theophany this Sunday. So for everyone who's celebrating, Christ is born, glorify Him, and yeah. In that case, this is going to be just more of a freewheeling discussion. Oh, I should clarify, there has been some controversy on this channel about the word discussion versus debate. This is a discussion, but it is a serious discussion. And if it becomes an argument and or debate, it could be louder than a debate, but it is officially a discussion. So we'll say that, okay? Because I don't want anyone to be like, that wasn't a debate, it was a discussion. Anyway, okay. So yeah, let's try to pick up where we left off. Where did you want to go with that?
I haven't watched the last one we did, and I can't really remember what. Honestly, I
sped through it at like 125, and there was some stuff on Gasser's Relatio.
And okay.
We were going to get in, but we were really because I kind of didn't want to touch that one because I'll tell you that's outside of Roman Catholic circles, and particularly like Roman Catholic circles that are dealing with trad-caths and stuff, like nobody knows what Gasser's Relatio is.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to tackle it, you can. But to me, I think to some of our audience, they're just going to be like, "What's that?"
Yeah. I think it's important because it's known as the official interpretation of papal infallibility. I believe it's chapter 4 of Vatican I, Pastor Eternus. Without reading Gasser's Relatio, you can miss a lot of things, and we can miss and take things out of context from Vatican I, which I see a lot of people do, both Catholics, Orthodox, and even Protestants, especially when the decree says not by the consent of the church. So the Pope's ex cathedras are irreformable in and of themselves and not by the consent of the church. And folks out there will think that means that the Pope's decree does not need the consent of the church, doesn't have to have it. He can decree in opposition to the church and everyone just has to accept it. But that's not at all what it's saying. What it's saying is that the gift of papal infallibility is from the Holy Spirit, according to what we teach. Obviously, you don't believe this, but according to what we teach, it's the gift of the Holy Spirit that allows the Pope to be able to speak for the church on behalf of the church. And the gift isn't a positive gift, meaning he's not led into the truth. So there are times where the Pope doesn't know what the answer is, right? The only thing that the gift does is it prevents him from speaking error or heresy, right? So if the Pope one day is going to wake up and say that Jesus Christ is not God, for example, and he says, I'm going to decree this, in one day, and then he tries to decree it, we believe that God is going to impede him from decreeing something heretical, right? He's not going to change his mind or lead him to where the truth is and then decree what's right. He's just going to impede him from decreeing something wrong. That's a very important distinction. And so we believe that this gift exists in the Roman See, belonging to the occupant of the Roman See, the Pope. And so that's something that's very important to understand when the decree says, when the Vatican decree says, and not by the consent of the church, that his decree is irreformable. It means that it's only reformable because God is behind the decree. Okay. Not because the consent of the church is behind it, right? So what it's saying is that what makes it true is that God is behind it, not the fact that the consent of the church is behind it. However, that's all it's saying there. But what it means is it does not mean that the consent of the church will not be behind it, or that the consent of the church is not a rule of faith for papal dogmas, right? The consent of the church must be behind papal dogma decree. It has to be behind it because we can never have a situation where the Pope is going to be in opposition to the bishops decreeing something, right? They're always going to be in unison at the end of the day. Providentially speaking, the Pope and the bishops will always be in agreement. As far, not all the bishops, just like in the early church, you had majority and heavy consensus agreeing with each
we
other.
still do that now, yeah.
Yeah, like it's like pretty what is it called? Conciliar, right? Even papal infallibility is pretty conciliar, as you probably already know. The last two decrees that were ex cathedra's, the Marian ones, the Assumption of Mary and the Immaculate Conception.
Immaculate Conception, yeah.
What happened was and I think I may have talked about this before, but just in case folks missed this, what happened was that the lay people actually petitioned the Pope first. They said, hey, we want you to decree that Mary is immaculate or that she assumed into heaven. And they received hundreds and thousands of petitions from people. And what the Pope did is he, in turn, polled all the bishops and said to them, do you believe that Mary is immaculately conceived? Or do you believe that she was assumed into heaven in the two different time periods that this happened? And the bishops took those polls and they polled their priests, congregations, and the priest took those polls and they polled the lay people and the diocese, the parishes, I should say. And the people said yes, went to the priest. They took the polls to the priest. The priest said yes. They took those polls to the bishops. The bishop said yes. When I say they said yes, I'm talking about like a heavy majority, like 95, 99%,
right,
somewhere around the
yeah.
And then they went to the Pope, and then the Pope decreed it. So he decreed what the mind of the church was. So the consent of the church was behind the decree, but we don't believe that the consent of the church makes a decree infallible. It's God that does. It's the fact that God did that gets. So that's a very important distinction. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. No. Well, that's going to lead me to a couple of quick questions. That obviously, I think you were referring to the process behind the dogmatization of the Assumption.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that, and I remember discussing that when I was a Roman Catholic. But I want to flip that around, because obviously not everything coming out of this papacy, for example. And by the way, I am putting up comments. If I don't see a question, I'm just going to put it up quietly and just kind of keep moving. But basically, what's it called? Let's see. John A. actually asked a question. I'm not familiar with Missiosity, Novus Ordo, or one of the traditionalist groups. He's actually a is it not Malabar? A Syro-Jacobite Catholic?
Yes, so Syriac. I was born and baptized and confirmed in the Syriac church. I received communion in the Chaldean church. My mom's Chaldean, my dad's Syriac.
Okay.
But I attend mostly either a Latin Mass, or sometimes I'll go to the Chaldean Mass, and sometimes I'll go to a Novus Ordo. So it just depends on the Sunday. But I prefer the Latin Mass over all three of those, to be honest with you.
Oh, okay. That's a surprise.
Yeah.
I'm just not like an insulted surprise or anything. Just curiosity.
Yeah.
But okay, so we talked about the situation when a doctrine is popular among your faithful. But what about when it's not? Like, let's take, for example, Pope Francis is like the gift that keeps on giving for us. Like between Amoris Laetitia, between all the fun things he's done with the Latin Mass, even recently. Yes. These are things that do go against the will of the people. Now, as I understand, basically, like, if he wants to, like, write a document concerning Arianism, I guess he gets struck by lightning or something. But what about at these lower levels that are not necessarily what you would call top level, infallible, or dogmatic? Like, it seems he still has a lot of power to ruin things.
So that's a very good question, and we want to make that distinction. And you kind of just alluded to that distinction. When we talk about ex cathedra's, so right now it's you're Orthodox, I'm Catholic, and we're talking East and West, right? So the context here is dogmas that bind the whole church to the belief, right? So it affects both East and West. So what we're discussing today is more so dogmas, like how the dogma is going to be decreed according to the Catholic Church, if East and West ever were in union together, kind of thing, from the Catholic's perspective. But to your question, what happens in these little Western things, like Western issues. What Pope Francis has done with some of these things, like for example, let's take the Latin Mass thing where he's restricted it, which I absolutely hate, obviously, because I go to the Latin Mass and I prefer that Mass. What he's done there, and if you read the document, and we don't have no data about this, but he does reference that the bishops were polled about this, that he did consult the bishops first about this whole restricting the Latin Mass. But even if he doesn't, right? Even in the Eastern Orthodox, or Orthodox, I should say, in the world, you have jurisdictions, right, where he has the right as the patriarch of the West to make decisions that deal with his jurisdictions, right? To where he's not involving himself with, the Byzantine or the Chaldeans or what have you, right? This is his area. This is under his liturgical praxis and discipline, I should say, right? So he does have the right, but even with that, he is still consulting the bishops, and this is what they came up with. Now, I don't have the data. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we have a question coming up, but just on that, I guess I was more into. I realized that the Latin Mass restrictions, while much more emotionally affecting to Roman Catholics, they're not really dogmatic. You could point to the new Mass and say essentially it has the same faith as the old Mass. Of course, there's disagreements we can have on whether you need to retain a lot of things. I personally feel way more stuff has been taken out of the traditional Western Mass than just what was in Poprimum. So the point is that, but when we talk about something that really does affect like the faith and life of the church, like when we're talking about like the controversy right now over same-sex blessings, then I mean, obviously, I want to deal with how does that, in terms of what the papacy can do, and in some cases has done, waffled on, etc. If that's not within that purview of infallibility, then effectively, I'm wondering how useful is this infallibility anyway, since he pretty much almost to the top level, with the exception of going straight on full divine oracular. We have to ask ourselves, it seems a pope has a lot of leeway to be completely evil, is my point. And I'm not saying that Francis is evil by any means. I don't know what he is, but the point is, the point is that, he could be evil and there'd be really no way to stop him. Right. So I'm wondering, like, how does this charism help?
That's a good question. So when it comes to, we got to take these issues individually, right? Like you brought up the
same-sex blessings.
Same-sex blessings, right? I've always been of the opinion that it's not so much the teaching that's off in what this guy does, Pope Francis. He seems to stay within the parameters of, according to us Catholics, right? Our parameters of orthodoxy. Like, it's not like it's heresy what he's doing, right? But in my opinion, it's still what's the word I'm looking for? Something that's a bad example, something that's scandalous in a sense, right? To where the perception is that he's teaching something to the public eye that may or may not be there, but he doesn't do a good job of clarifying what he's really teaching. So he actually just came out with that book, Hope or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And he says in there that that the blessing isn't the marriage, it's the blessing of the individuals, right? And if you think about that, there really isn't anything inherently wrong about blessing an individual that's gay, right? Or that's divorced and remarried or what have you. It's both that he's giving permission.
Forgive me, but I'm maybe I'm crazy, but I hear this a lot where we talk about the same-sex blessing sort of thing, and then we talk about divorced and remarried couples. I do not consider a divorced and remarried couple in the same status as I consider.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm
just saying.
Yeah, because what he did, it wasn't just blessing same-sex. Like what he gave permission to is to bless same-sex and divorce and remarry. That's what he gave permission to. I'm not saying those things are equal. I'm just saying that that's what the praxis is. That's what the discipline is, right? That's what he came out with.
Yeah.
That's a different
Two
issue.
questions have come up since then, and I am gonna put up some more comments that we're seeing here. Yep. Well, it's not fake news, but we're going to get to the two questions. And the first one's from Anonymous Man 115. Says, question for Elijah. This is for later on. Okay, so if it's for later on, are you familiar with the notion that papacy is effectively an endeavor of humanism? And what are your thoughts on that? It's for later, so we're going to leave that one till later. Reader John asks, where does he think that the Pope derives his authority if no such authority existed in the early church? And this is talking about the kind of the structure you were talking about now. Like, we don't find that in the early church, obviously. And so on. Like, my question is, how did you get here?
Well, that's a good question. I think we do find it in the early church, and that's what we're doing today, right? We're discussing where, and my job is to support that, and your job is to, say no, that's not what that means, right? In my opinion, I think that Lateran 649, everything that surrounds it, the quotes from Maximus, the quotes from Pope Martin, the quotes from Stephen of Dore, I think lay out very explicitly everything that I'm saying so far. Very explicit.
That's okay. So Lateran 649 is a good jumping off point. Without getting into the quotes immediately, what I'd like to see, and because I believe our interpretations of what occurred are going to be radically different. How do you interpret what happens in the controversy surrounding Lateran 649?
Well, without getting into the quotes, it's very hard to do. But there was a heresy of
Monothelitism.
Two wills, two energies of Christ, or
turned
single,
into one,
right?
Yeah,
turned into one, right? And Pope Martin holds a synod, right? And there is a little bit of the East represented in that synod, not very much, right?
Saint Maximus, basically, and a couple of other people.
Yeah, and I think there were some like letters from Eastern monks, if I remember correctly, but not like it wasn't like Chalcedon or what have you, or Ephesus, where whole lots of East was represented, and then you have the legates where they represent the West. So, and they, in that council, in that synod, we have so many letters that testify to what I'm saying, right? And I can read those later on. I know you don't want me to do that right now as far as getting into the quotes.
No, we can. It's just what I want to do is I want to establish a contrast between our understandings of what was happening, which will color our interpretations of the quotes.
Sure. And this is just like a very quick summary, right? Because it's been a while. I think I did a show on 649 like 5 years ago.
Okay.
So I'd have to refresh my memory to all the details that happened. But essentially, 649 was not a heretical council. It's just not ecumenical, right? They decreed the right stuff. It was just not viewed as ecumenical, right? And then what was it? 681?
Yeah.
Was the
Third Council Constantinople,
right? And then so they held a council, and I think that was Pope Agatho, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Pope Senate, yeah.
And so, and the history. They decree that Christ has two wills, two energies.
The Orthodox decree that Christ has two wills, whereas the Monothelites decree that Christ had one will. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you a little bit of how I understand the history there.
Please.
And in that, we'll be able to see why two people can read the quote in different ways.
Sure.
As I see it, monothelitism originally came out of the compromise attempts between the Monophysites and the Orthodox in the empire. And basically, the Henoticon eventually led to people understanding things in terms of the ways the Monothelites did. Excuse me. This became extremely popular extremely quickly within all the patriarchates. And there was a lot of imperial wrangling that was going on. But most importantly, St. Maximus represented, the strict Orthodox party. St. Martin also represented the strict Orthodox party. But here's where we have some divergences. St. Maximus attempts, and he basically says this, they're back and forth with Pope St. Martin. they basically try to create an ecumenical council. They actually try to label it as such, and so on and so forth. Now, granted, it can't be considered an ecumenical council just because of the numerical paucity of bishops, so on and so forth. But the orthodoxy in it is undisputed. But the aftermath of that was after attempting to hold this ecumenical council, which did not work in terms of rallying the church together. St. Maximus was punished. St. Martin was killed. And then basically at one point before 681, Honorius even begins to accept the Monothelite heresy, so on and so forth.
Right.
So this, meanwhile, Monothelite had been waning in the other patriarchates. Monothelitism and Orthodoxy had returned. So when they held the council of 681, they vindicated people like St. Maximus, they vindicated St. Martin, they condemned, Pope Agatho expressly condemned Pope Honorius, and the council did as well. So now with that background, we can start looking at some of these quotes, and we can look at their context and see if this was really a representation of the papacy kind of using a kind of supranational authority, or were they just trying to preserve orthodoxy, and how well did it hold up?
Sure. And I hope you don't mind that I just kind of took it to 649.
Not at all.
Okay. Because I think that's where papal infallibility, as far as how Vatican I defined it, it, of course, in my opinion, is where it's going to be like full blown shown. I hear a lot, and I'm sure you agree with this. There is no such ecclesiology or papacy. No, Vatican I did not exist anywhere in the early church as far as what it decreed in the first millennium, right?
Yeah, obviously. I don't feel that's really there at all.
Right. Now, what my burden of proof here is to show that they believed that this gift existed, this gift of infallibility that belongs to the Roman See, that it existed, right? When I have these discussions with Eastern Orthodox, where it usually goes to is, okay, well, maybe they believe this gift existed, but there's no such thing as the Pope standing up by himself alone and acting, and decreeing something by himself, and everyone just accepts what he said, right? That's not what papal infallibility is. That's not the point of papal infallibility, right? And I just wanted to clarify. So when we say papal infallibility, just because it's papal, just because the Pope's voice is behind it, doesn't mean it's the Pope's voice alone that believes it, right? So he has to, like I said earlier, there has to be the consent of the church behind the decree, or else we're pinning the Pope against the bishops, which we cannot do. The Pope and the bishops providentially will always act together. We have to remember that, right? When we're looking at these examples in the early church, we're looking at what did these folks believe about the Roman See, right? Forget how it works. How is it one man that speaks? Does he have to have like 50% behind him or 80%? Forget all that. What we're trying to prove, trying to prove it is this gift. They teach that this gift exists, right? So if you don't mind, I'd like to read a quote here, and this is from, I don't know if you're familiar, I'm sure you're familiar with this book because you're familiar with the individual, but it's Eric Ibarra's Papacy book. He has a quote here from St. Maximus, right? And I think this quote really captures what I'm saying here, right? Not just this, but there's several ones that I could read, but let's start with that. And he said, sorry, give me 1 second if you don't mind. Okay. St. Maximus says, St. Maximus says, sorry, Father.
No problem.
Okay, he says, for it is not right that one who has already been condemned and cast out by the Apostolic See of the city of Rome for his wrong opinions should be named with any kind of honor until he be received by her, having returned to her, nay, to our Lord, by a pious confession and orthodox faith. Let him, Pyrrhus, I don't know if I ever say his name right, but it's such a weird spelling, the patriarch, hasten before all things to satisfy the Roman see, for if it is satisfied, all will agree in calling him pious and orthodox. For he only speaks in vain who thinks he ought to persuade or entrap persons like myself, and does not satisfy and implore the blessed Pope of the most holy Church of the Romans. For if he thinks he must satisfy others and fails to implore the most blessed Roman Pope, he is acting like a man who, when accused of a murder or some other crime, does not hasten to prove his innocence to the judge appointed by law. And he says, but unless uselessly and without profit does his best to demonstrate his innocence to private individuals who have no power to acquit him from the accusation. Wherefore, if he is careful to do this, exhort him to make a becoming statement to the Roman Pope, so that by his command the matter concerning Pyrrhus may be canonically and suitably ordered for the glory of God. And then he says, the apostolic throne, which is from the incarnate Son of God himself, and which, in accordance with the holy canons and the definitions of faith, received from all the holy councils universal and supreme dominion, authority, and the power over all of God's churches throughout the world to bind and loose. Now, I'm interested in hearing how you would interpret something like the Roman Church had authority over all the churches, and they received this authority from Christ and from the ecumenical councils.
Wow. That's a great quote. I don't think my interpretation is going to quite go with the one that you're thinking.
Obviously,
but
to be Catholic.
yeah. The first problem that I see with this, I would say that obviously is the first see above all the churches. That is an honorific. It is useful. However, of all people, St. Martin was the one person that they probably weren't heeding when he wrote it. But what is more important here, the first part of it about being received without repenting first to Rome, that's actually a canonical procedure. You actually find that in the canons of the church, that if a person is penanced or is excommunicated by any bishop, they can't travel to another bishop for anything unless they first repent and get received back by that bishop. So what he's quoting in that first part is actually standard canonical procedure. It doesn't, every bishop has to do that. But more importantly, when it comes down to where he's talking, first off, the stuff he's proclaiming is completely orthodox, so we agree with him. But your second point, which is that, that he being the head of the churches throughout the world, the churches throughout the world weren't listening to him, and he was right. That's my point. So they clearly didn't actually have a notion, is what I'm saying, of that he spoke and we shall listen. They did the exact opposite. They didn't listen. So that's why I'm saying I'm not sure how to see that as a proof of kind of that, I guess you could say that kind of authority. And again, we still haven't even dealt with Honorius, because unfortunately he was also a pope. Mm-hmm. So we find that problem coming up. So it's not so much that I disagree with the quote. I do, but when put into its canonical context, and when put into its historical context, it's much more tragic than we realize, because if they had listened to him, there would have been peace in the church. But they didn't, because they had no notion of that.
Sure. So, of course, I don't think that everybody in the early church was, gung-ho about what I think is papal infallibility. Right? I'm not saying that.
They didn't. I don't think they had a conception of it at all.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. What is he talking about? So now, this is St. Maximus spilling his pen. He's not concerned with who's accepting it or who's denying it. He wrote this. Mm-hmm. So we have to deal with what he wrote, right? We can't just kind of say, okay, historically speaking, they weren't listening to the Pope, and so therefore the quote is moot, right? He still wrote this, and he's a saint. So either he wrote this and he wrote heresy, or he wrote this and he meant it for what he wrote, which is, again, he's saying that it has dominion and authority, and this authority comes from the fact that, and if I read the rest of it, it comes from the fact that it's the divine institution of Christ. He says, for ever since the incarnate word of God came down to us, all the churches of Christians everywhere have held the greatest church there to be their sole base and foundation, since on the one hand, it is in no way overcome by the gates of Hades, according to the very promise of our Savior, but holds the keys of the Orthodox confession and faith in him, and opens the only true and real religion to those who approach with godliness. And on the other hand, it shuts up and locks every heretical mouth that speaks unrighteousness against the Most High. So he's taking that. I guess he has the Peter syndrome, right? What Orthodox would call the Peter syndrome. He's saying,
well, I don't use orthobro language. I don't speak orthobro.
Not you.
So what I would say is this on that quote, is that many of the phrases that he's using are phrases that are used in ecumenical councils concerning dogmas of the church. And this is one thing that I point this out, and I think most sane people agree that if you are a baptized, confessing and communing Orthodox Christian, and you recite the creed on Sunday with your church, you are yourself speaking infallibly, because you are using language that is by nature infallible. And so in that sense, that's what I mean by that, is that there is a true, this is where we get to the consensus patrum. There's a consensus of what is true. And when people speak it, it's undeniable. I think St. Maximus was using kind of inflationary language due to the office of St. Martin, who was the Pope, and saying, look, this guy is important. He's teaching the Orthodox faith. You should be following this. You don't have a right to do other. He's making a persuasive case. But in the end, they still didn't listen, and then they killed Pope St. Martin and St. Maximus. So, well, they chopped off his tongue and his hand. But the point is that the concept, and you see what I'm saying? I don't deny a concept of something being infallibly correct by the power of the Holy Spirit. I see myriad ways that can happen. And I certainly see that in the case of Pope St. Martin and St. Maximus. But what I don't see is the office. In other words, the spiritual authority I see, but since nobody listened, the concept of the office where people had to follow with divine assent isn't there. So in other words, like, I agree with all the spiritual aspects, but all the temporal aspects you're adding on, I just don't see them.
So as a Catholic, I had to defend Vatican I, right?
Yeah.
So the Vatican I teaches that the Pope has this gift of infallibility because of Matthew 16, right?
Okay.
And I just did that.
May I? Right. You did. And I will say you did that in a very, as well as you could.
Right.
But now I'm going to hit you with the question I was going to ask in the first debate, because now's a perfect time for it. I'm sure you've had some time to think about it. Considering how much potential for harm there is at a non-infallible level, plus combined with the fact that at the allegedly infallible level, at least using the case of St. Martin and St. Maximus, it didn't help much. Would I be justified in asking the question, do we need a papacy at all?
Well, okay, so that's a different question than did Christ set up the papacy? So if Christ set up...
we didn't even touch that. We haven't gotten through that fully yet.
I'm saying that's what St. Maximus is teaching. He's saying that Christ, in this Petrine key that he gave to Peter, this Petrine passage, he's saying that because Christ gave this to Peter, that this authority that the Roman See, the occupant of the Roman See, has that authority, and he has that authority above all. So he's teaching this. And it's not so much, is the papacy necessary? Now, and I'll answer your question because I think it is necessary, and I'll tell you why. It's not so much that the question is it necessary, right? The question that we need to ask first is it divinely instituted? Because if the answer is yes, it is divinely instituted, which I would argue it is, and I would argue that I've shown that here so far with these few quotes. If it is divinely instituted, then it doesn't matter whether I or you think it's necessary. It matters that Christ instituted it. And so then our opinion doesn't matter. Now, to answer your question, and I'm glad you asked, I was actually going to go and answer that question. I didn't we didn't plan this, right? Obviously, you didn't tell me how we're going to ask you this question. Pope, it's not just Pope Gregory, but Pope Gregory is one of the popes that teaches, and there's a lot of early church fathers that taught this, where they'll say something, and I'm sure you've heard this before, Father. They'll say something like that Christ chose 12 apostles, but he set out one as the head in order for divisions not to arise. Would you agree that some fathers did speak like this, so that schisms would not arise, right? I think Jerome says that, Cyprian says that, Augustine.
Yeah,
says
but I would argue that that's something that plays out on a number of levels, including at the local synodical level, etc. So yeah, I wouldn't ascribe to it as much importance as that.
Sure, but Pope Gregory subscribed it to himself, right? I am that head of the church in order for divisions not to arise, right? That's Pope Gregory the Great, and not just him. There's many popes that did that. Pope Leo the Great did that.
But I've got to push back on Saint Gregory the
Please
Great.
do, yeah, please do. I know you're going to say that.
First, well, I mean, I'm going to push back on Saint Maximus afterwards, but on Saint Gregory the Great, I mean, I don't want to have to be the one to point out that it was Saint Gregory who wrote a series of long letters against the idea of a universal bishop.
Yes.
Because, and this was largely due to a misunderstanding of the term ecumenical patriarch as they used it in the East. He understood it as bishop of the universe, which would be the technical translation of the Greek, but the Greek being universe actually meant the empire. So the point is, St. Gregory talks about the spiritual aspect of this very clearly, where he says we cannot make a bishop of bishops. The concepts that are underlying what you're claiming are also undermined by what St. Gregory himself wrote on the episcopate. And I might add that in St. Maximus's case, when he was confronted, if you look at the life of St. Maximus, when he was confronted by the imperial guard and was ready to be tortured, he specifically argues that he would not be in communion with any of the monothelite churches. And then they said, well, who are you in communion with? He said, I'm in communion with Rome. And they said, but Rome is going to sign a deal with us tomorrow. What will you do then? His response wasn't, I'll stay with Rome. His response was, I'll stay with no one.
Yes, because that would be my response too. If I heard Pope Francis was going to, let's say, decree something that's 100% heretical, my beliefs about papal infallibility, that's going to go out the door, obviously, right? Because I'm no longer going to believe.
I thought you said he couldn't say something heretical, though.
No, he can't. That's my point. So in my belief, it's impossible for the Pope to say something heretical.
Interesting.
But if someone comes to me, I'm saying in the sense of ex cathedra's, right? He can't bind the church to a heretical teaching. And that's my belief, to your point, right? And if somebody comes to me and says, hey, tomorrow Pope Francis is going to decree that that Christ is a prophet, not God, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's going to put a lot of doubt to my belief of papal infallibility. It's going to go out the door. But that doesn't mean that I didn't hold to that before. It's just that if someone is saying that and what you said actually did not happen, they actually lied to him, right?
Right.
It was a lie. So
however,
if someone was saying that to me falsely, but I'm going to believe him, okay, fine. If he's going to do that, then I'm on my own, because there's no papal infallibility. There's no Roman See being protected by God and the divine institution. All that's going to go out the door if someone is going to lie to me like that, right?
That's opening up a very dangerous question, Elijah, because you know what I'm going to bring up now.
Sure,
I'm going to bring up Easterners in the 11th century using the creed without the Filioque.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Pope introduced the Filioque, which changes the entire creedology of the church. What you're saying is the Orthodox were justified in not recognizing the Pope anymore, because as far as they were concerned, even in your paradigm, that's good enough grounds to walk.
I mean, I think the Filioque is something that comes from Christ and the apostles. So I don't think that is good grounds. So your example doesn't work for me, because I'm a Catholic. I believe the Filioque is an Orthodox doctrine.
Can you find a Filioque in either an Eastern or a Western father for the first 600 years of the church? Because Augustine never directly states Filioque. He uses language that could be described as filioquist, but he never actually says the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son.
Yes, he does.
We could look at it.
Yeah, we can, but I mean, we can. I don't want to do a show on the Filioque right now. We're doing a show on the Papacy.
Well,
But
I'm just saying, you just opened the door. You
he
opened the door with the whole papal infallibility thing changing.
Of course. Well, explicitly, he does say that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. It's a very famous quote of Augustine. There's no question that he taught this. The question is, what did he mean by
true.
it? Yeah, I mean, the question is, I think it's in his on the Trinity. If I'm not
I've
mistaken.
heard this before, but there have been studies that noted that there is even an entire book on the Trinity, which might not even be his. There's a lot of scholarship on that specific book. And there's a lot of questions about what were interpolations in the text later, so on and so forth. Let me see here.
Scholars, I mean, are pretty unanimous that Augustine taught the Filioque, even Eastern Orthodox scholars.
You see, the problem is that when we talk about this, we're talking about 20th century scholarship. And I'm very specific about 20th century scholarship because I've noticed in the past 15 to 20 years, scholars have become much more critical in the way that they were in the 19th century. And what this means is, this is something I was actually discussing today with somebody who had asked me because of my series, Who Invented the Roman Catholic Church, where I argue that basically the investiture controversy, as you call it, or the Hildebrandian Civil War in Europe, basically was the real end of Western Orthodoxy and the beginning of the Roman Catholic Church. But I bring this up because he argued it seems like modern scholars sometimes say that it was an estrangement period of around 300 to 400 years, which I don't believe. It's much more confusing than that. But the point is that came about in the 20th century to introduce the idea that the churches weren't in schism, but were simply estranged. And so this is part of the reason why I take many 20th century claims of scholars with a very large grain of salt. There's usually a lot of division in the scholarship that isn't immediately present. And so I say that has to be analyzed case by case. With St. Augustine and De Trinitate, that's something our Bishop Enoch has spent something like 5 to 6 years studying just that book. So it's not quite as simple as just the assumptions that are underlying a lot of modern, for lack of a better word, popular history.
I get that, but I'm saying that he explicitly did say that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. You can interpret that however you want.
Well, I just want to know where he said that.
But it's there. If you just do St. Augustine Filioque, I just did one real quick. It's a long quote.
What book is it?
Book 4, chapter 20. He goes
book 4, chapter 20 of De Trinitate, right?
Yes. And then also book 15, chapter 26. And
Let's take a look.
Yeah, so you can take a look at that. I mean, it's pretty explicit. It's what he's saying. But this was supposed to be a papacy debate. It's there. If folks want to look at it, you can look at it right now, Father, if you want. But I'd like to go back to Pope Gregory and answer your question about the necessity of the papacy. But
we can talk about that. I am going to look for this, though.
It's your show. Yeah, it's up to you.
Yeah, so that's fine. But in any case, because if I remember correctly, let me see here. Book 4 is basically describing really more the difference between the Father and the Son, and how they operate than it is just in a. It's not the. It's certainly not the whole. It's not a reduction of the concept that the Father is cause, but something else. So this is part of the reason why I would say that it's not as clean cut as.
That's okay, but you asked me where. Okay. And I'm telling you that's where it is. It's in the Trinitarian. It's everywhere.
But I'm arguing that it had a totally different meaning than you do.
That's fine. That's fine. I grant you that.
And St. Maximus even recognizes a different Filioque that was rejected at Florence.
That's fine.
The point is that I'm just saying that the concept of putting it in the creed, etc., to an 11th century Orthodox Christian might have been as horrifying as saying Jesus is just a prophet to a modern day person. Now, although that's because post-Islam and stuff, but the point is, let me see if we can find some questions here, because I know there were a few that came up, and I'm looking for questions that have nothing to do with same-sex marriage, guys. I do not. Maybe I opened up a can of worms I shouldn't have. Let me see here. case.
And then I'd like to answer your question if
Absolutely, I want to get to that too. Actually, let's do that first. Let's answer my quote. Why is the papacy necessary?
Okay, so the reason why it's necessary, and again, I'm going to the fathers. This is what the fathers taught, right? Why Christ set out one as head so that schisms and divisions may not arise. Okay, and so, and I know you brought up Saint Gregory. We don't believe the Pope is the universal bishop. That is a false teaching. In fact, Vatican I quotes Pope Gregory that says, "My honor is your honor." And I'm sure you've heard this quote where it gives the bishops that authority, where the Pope's authority is to really confirm the bishop's authority, to make sure that people are listening to the bishops, right? And so this is St. Gregory. He says, "To all who know the gospel, it is manifest that the care of the whole church was entrusted by the voice of the Lord to blessed Peter, the prince of the apostles. For to him it is said, 'Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep.' To him it is said, 'Behold, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith fail not. And you being converted, confirm your brethren. To him it is said, 'You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Loose on earth, loose in heaven.' Behold, he received the keys of the kingdom of heaven. The power to bind and loose is given to him. The care of the whole church is committed to him, and also the primacy."
Mm-hmm.
And so the fathers will take these passages, which again, I'm not saying you do that, but we are accused of having the Peter syndrome, but the fathers have the Peter syndrome because they attached these quotes to the Pope of Rome at the time. And they said he has this authority, if you don't mind, he has this authority to be the head of the church. He has the care of the whole church. And the fathers will say that the head was there as a necessity so that divisions may not arise. Okay, so to answer your questions, that's my answer is for divisions.
I understand. No, I understand your answer, but now I'm going to disagree.
That's the father's answers, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's not. I'm going to disagree with you here, very vehemently, I might add, because you pointed out that the care of the church is the primary purpose of the papacy. I would argue that is not only the primary purpose of every patriarchate, but the papacy par excellence. That said, the care of the church and what the papacy became are two different things. So the understanding of how Orthodox understand care of the church versus how the post-Hildebrandian Roman Catholic Church understood care of the church are radically different and exclusive, I will add, because the Orthodox have an existing canon law. The canon law that Roman Catholics use today, and even Eastern Catholics, although they have the Code of the Eastern Churches, is based upon the original canonical collections of Deus Dedit in the 11th and 12th centuries, and those were modified canonical lists that were basing, that had as their undergirding belief the Dictatus Papae. And I'd like to put this on the screen, if I could, just so that I could show you the contrast as to what I mean by care of the church from an Orthodox side versus the care of the church on the Roman Catholic side. And I realize that this is not an infallible document. I never claimed that. But it was the opening salvo in the investiture controversy. And it was a series of 27 theses. This is the original Vatican manuscript. And basically, what you're going to notice is that it sounds strangely more like the canon law you're used to than the canon law we're used to. This was the first one I'm going to leave alone because technically one could make that argument. But when we start seeing things like the pontiff alone is called universal by the right, that he alone can depose or reconcile bishops, that his legates preside in council, that the Pope can depose those absent. I'm bringing these up because of the fact that canonical procedure had long been established for a lot of these things. There was a procedure that even the popes in the 9th and the 10th centuries refer back to. This is completely alien to it, but this becomes the basis of what we know today as canon law in the Roman Church.
Wait, say that
So-
again. You said the popes in the 9th and 10th century refer to what
They refer to the actual collections of the canons of the ecumenical councils, which is
okay.
what we do, which is what we still do today.
Okay.
Canon law, as we understand it in Roman Catholicism, is based on canonical collections that were done by certain Hildebrandian scholars to advance the claims of the Dictatus Papae. That's why they look so radically different from just what's in the rudder. And there's not much pope there because the popes were subject to the canons and they understood themselves as subject to the canons, including St. Gregory. Hold on. We have some. Okay, I'm still trying to. Now I want to get to some questions. So I did appreciate your answer. I'm just saying that from an Orthodox perspective, we wouldn't see it that way. Like, we would, like, let me put it to you this way. The Pope being able to depose bishops alone. This is something that exists currently in Roman Catholic canon law. But for us, that's insane. It doesn't exist anywhere in the canons, and previous pre-schism popes would have thought it was insane too. The point I'm trying to make here is that, so when you say this is what the fathers are teaching, and that the Peter syndrome, I still don't get Peterson. I don't understand it. But the point is that when you're saying what you think it means, it actually means something else to us because our canonical tradition understands it in a completely different way.
And that's fine. Yeah,
and I would understand, and that was the Western canonical tradition too, is my point. So that was the universal tradition.
I disagree with that. So you're saying that the popes of the early church did not see themselves as head of the church?
They saw themselves as head of the church in a formal sense, but they certainly didn't believe they could go into other dioceses and depose bishops or things like that. They didn't have that right.
Sure, I'll grant you that. Right now, I don't think I'll grant your interpretation. I disagree with that. I do think that they did believe that, and we can have examples of that, and we can show that they did depose other patriarchs, not just bishops. For example, I think we talked about this last time, but Pope Celestine, before any council was being talked about, he believed he can excommunicate Nestorius, who was the patriarch of Constantinople.
Excommunicate and depose are two different things. Any bishop can excommunicate anyone, but they can't depose them.
Okay, but what he did, his idea of excommunication is that you're no longer part of the church, and no one should commune with him.
No, that's still true with us. Completely agree with that.
And no one should commune with him. No, that's not true with you.
No, that is true. We have that exact belief. However, what we don't have, we don't believe that our bishop, let's say it's St. Celestine or someone else who's proclaiming the Orthodox faith, they can excommunicate, they can tell the people to stay away from them, but unless they're jurisdictionally, physically over them, they can't step into their diocese and say you're deposed. What they can do is, after 3 years of heresy, is install another bishop there.
So let's put this in practicality.
Okay.
Saint Cyril was going to excommunicate Nestorius by the authority of Pope Celestine, right?
He was getting support for what he planned to do anyway, which was to anathematize Nestorius. And
you just got muted, I think. Hold on. Can you hear me?
There
you are. Well, I didn't get
yeah, what I said was, no, he was looking for support from St. Celestine so that they could do that together and therefore start the process of a conciliar deposition process in the empire, which became, Ephesus, 431. So the point is,
Ephesus was going to happen at that point. There was no Ephesus at that point. St. Cyril had no idea that Ephesus was going to happen. He received instructions from Pope Celestine to excommunicate Nestorius if within 10 days of the letter being sent to him.
Yeah, no, I've read the dialogue between them.
But people have.
But St. Cyril knew it. My point is St. Cyril was basically giving St. Celestine this information with the knowledge that St. Celestine, following the proper procedure, would say, now you're going to have to be to trial, come to trial, or be excommunicated. The idea that St. Cyril did not think a council would eventually remove Nestorius is unrealistic. He was blessing people who were separating from Nestorius and forming house churches with priests, etc., that were not communicating with Nestorius. The whole point was he was planning to rid the church of Nestorius, and he did the best he could.
Okay, so Pope Celestine, when he told St. Cyril to do this, he said, you will do this by the authority of my see, the Roman see, right? He didn't
Yeah.
say you will do this by your own authority. And Saint Cyril did not blink, did not, bat an eye. He did not like go against that. You would think he would, because how could a Roman see, how could a Pope of Rome excommunicate a patriarch of Constantinople by his own authority? He did not say that you are going to do this by my authority, your authority, this guy's authority. He said, by my authority, you will do this. And he took that and he says, okay,
What
fine,
if I hate to apply Occam's razor to this, but what if there's a simpler explanation than the one you're seeing? And that one is very simple. St. Cyril was the Bishop of Alexandria, which would have been third in the taxis to Rome and Constantinople. So he would have had to gone to someone of higher rank, which happened to be the head of the first imperial city, which would be Rome, and he was Orthodox, so that he could say, the Bishop of Rome and myself, we are holding a council against you, and 10 days or you're out.
Well,
the point is,
there's no council. They were not holding a council against him. That was not a council. That was just letters being passed on between St. Cyril and Pope Celestine. There's no council.
You do. This was like literally the year before the council, right? Like this is. It's not like this. The council is like a decade later. This was literally all happening at once. And I'm sure he had They had to notify the imperial authorities. They knew Nestorius was going to complain. This would lead to ultimately a council. There was no way around that.
There was no council. It doesn't matter if the council happened in 3 minutes after that. At the time that they were doing this, there was no council. They were doing this all with one see having authority to do this, and that's the Roman see. Now, you made a point. It's because Alexandria is third, Constantinople is second, Rome is first. How is that any different than the Catholic belief that the Roman Church is first and therefore has the authority to do things like this? How is that any different than what
the question is, the things like this is where we disagree on. From my perspective, all St. Cyril was doing was getting the assistance of the first bishop in the taxis to discipline this guy or start the canonical process for a council, which eventually happened. I don't have to isolate the Pope necessarily because he's part of the system, and it was an imperial system.
What would have happened had Saint Cyril done the excommunication under Pope Celestine's authority? Would that have been effective for Nestorius to be excommunicated from the whole church or just from those two sees?
No, I would say in that particular, that's an interesting question. I would say this: if whenever an anathema is issued or an excommunication is issued, it only has up to its own scope where it's accepted. But ultimately, the truth of an anathema, the truth of an excommunication, are universal. So you could be the smallest bishop in like Calabria or something, and if the world goes in heresy and you say the Orthodox faith and excommunicate those who aren't following it, then your excommunication, your anathema, still has legal authority because it is the true teaching. Now, I would say that, of course, when we say legal authority, it gets trickier because in the time of St. Celestine and St. Cyril and Nestorius, church authority and legal authority were intertwined. So ultimately, there was going to be a legal procedure as a consequence of those actions. But even outside of that, there's still a spiritual authority that comes with the excommunication or anathema, no matter who you are, just as long as it's correct.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I caught the answer. So would that have been effective, the whole church or just those two sees?
My answer would be that it largely would have affected those two sees because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in Nestorius's area, he had still considerable support, so he wasn't affected there. They didn't care about the anathema, and that's what led to the council.
Well, that's different than what I'm talking about.
Okay, what are you talking about?
Because you have Arius who had his followers, right? But it doesn't matter because if Arius is not part of the church, his followers are no longer part of the church.
No, I said areas, not Arius. I meant
no. I'm not saying you said
geographical areas.
I'm not saying you said Arius. I'm saying Arius. This is different. Yeah. So what I'm saying is you still have one church, right?
Yep.
The church is still one, regardless of Nestorius and his followers are part of it, right?
Well, they aren't because they're heretics.
Exactly. So that you're making my point. So that one church is excommunicating Nestorius and anyone who's communing with him,
Mhm.
right? But whoever's agreeing with excommunication is part of the true church, which
Yeah.
is what Saint Cyril. So that means so what you're saying to me, which is what I agree with, is that it would be universal to the
It would be
universal church.
that double excommunication would be sufficiently universal for the whole church to recognize it. But there was also, because of the church state symphonia, there was a legal procedure that had been inextricably tied to it.
Okay, so then going back to what I was saying, you have
Mhm.
a Pope of Rome who believed that he had authority to excommunicate a patriarch of Constantinople who was second in rank, and you had
Mhm.
a patriarch of Alexandria who's third in rank. These are not just monks or
Well,
priests. These are high ranking.
my argument would be that the Pope of Rome or any bishop has the right to excommunicate a heretic, no matter what his rank.
Wait, say that one more time. I'm sorry.
I would say that the Pope of Rome or any validly, properly constituted bishop has the right to excommunicate a heretic, no matter what their formal rank is, if they're a heretic.
Okay, so that's the point of this whole story, is that you got two patriarchs, second and third in rank, who think that the other is a heretic. And so how do they solve the problem is they both appeal to the Bishop of Rome, who is above them, and they say who's right here, right? Basically, to
Mhm.
summarize their question is, who's right here? Saint Cyril is asking, he specifically asks Pope Celestine in the letter, and I can pull it up if you want. Um, he says, tell us if we should commune with this guy, right? Tell us if we should be in communion with him. Should we? You tell me whatever it is that you decide, I will do. And Pope Celestine writes a letter and says, give him 10 days, and if he doesn't repent, then you excommunicate him under my authority. That's the story. No council, no nothing at that point. And
Mhm.
St. Cyril was going to take that and say, okay, I'm going to do that. And I don't think that was a political move on St. Cyril's part, because
I
that
don't
kind of
think it
gives
was a
you,
political move. I think it was a spiritual move. And I
yeah.
think that you find that in the canonical order in the pre-schism councils, which is that you have the clergy around the episcopate, the bishops around the synod around the patriarch or the metropolitans around the patriarchs, and finally you get to the top, the not the penarchy proper, but that is in the Code of Justinian. So it makes sense that once you are talking about an interpatriarchal level, that St. Cyril would defer to St. Celestine on that. And I think he probably did it with exceeding confidence that St. Celestine was going to say precisely what he did, because that was the proper canonical procedure for dealing with a heretic.
No, well, yeah, it's proper because Pope Celestine is the head of the church, and that's why Pope Cyril of Alexandria went to him in the first place,
Well,
because
my
he
my
knows he
my
knows
point
that.
is
Sorry, go ahead.
my point is that that would be proper at any level of the church's hierarchy. That would be proper if that was a priest and an archpriest reached out to the bishop. It would be proper if that was a bishop and another bishop reached out to the metropolitan. That would be proper if it was a metropolitan and another metropolitan reached out to the patriarch. The point is, just because we're talking about the level doesn't mean the procedure has changed. It's the same procedure.
Right. So, I mean, that's pretty much Catholic belief, is that the Pope is at the top of this hierarchy,
Mhm.
and he has the ability and the authority to do to make actions, to do something that is going to affect the universal church when he does something, as opposed to if Saint Cyril were to do it, it's only going to affect his own see and patriarchate,
And
right? So
I mean, you're
he
talking
can
about
say
the third
he can say
largest see of the church.
yeah, he can say, I'm not going to commune with this guy anymore. Saint Nestorian. I'm not going to. Saint Cyril is going to say, I'm not going to commune with Nestorian anymore, right? And so that's fine. They're going to separate, right?
But
But
that
that's
but
not.
that wouldn't make sense.
It
You
wouldn't.
would appeal to the top of the chain for order, unless they were the one that was committing the heresy itself. That my point is that what he did was follow procedure, and that was the procedure that Saint Celestine followed as well. So what I guess my point, and this is the point you see with ninth and 10th century popes, is that they're subject to the procedure. They're subject to the canonical order. They're not above it. They don't create it, they don't control it. The canonical order is more powerful than they are, even if
Well,
you're the Pope. That's
okay,
something that they understood.
so he does say that ancient custom necessitates me to come to you. St. Cyril says that, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
He said, now, what ancient custom is he referring to, though?
In that would be a reference to the deference to the head of the synod, which you find in various canons of the church. You find that even in the descriptions of the it all goes back to the people going around the bishop, and then the bishops going around the metropolitan, and everything's just an expanded version of what you see at the bottom, which is the church surrounding the bishop, if that makes sense. So the patriarchs, by ancient custom, would go to the Pope. I think that's in the Council of Nicaea. Or it's either that or Sardica. I'm not sure which is, but there's a reference to it in both. So there was a procedural reason this happened, but it was not that he wasn't happy to do it, because he knew that St. Celestine was Orthodox and Nestorius was a heretic. So he was glad to do it, but there's a procedure.
Okay. So that's fine. There's a procedure. I disagree that this procedure is canonical and something that's just from the church. I believe that this comes from Christ. It's divinely instituted. So you cannot take that. And that's what St. Maximus says. That the quotes I read, people can rewind this and listen to the quotes. He specifically says that this authority of Rome comes from him. And in the same context, you have Stephen of Dor, who says the same thing, where he says this authority is canonical and divinely instituted, that Rome has.
Right, but I wouldn't disagree with him, because both of them were saying it in defense of orthodoxy. Not only were they following the proper traditional procedure, which of course the heretics could ape, they could make a weak copy of it, do the same sort of procedure, but they had the divinity of the true faith with them, whereas the other people were slimy heretics who didn't. And so this is my point: is that it can be read in a totally different way. That's not necessarily pro-papal, but frankly pro-dogma, pro-Christian, and pro-procedural.
Yeah. But see, the point I'm making here is that they wouldn't write these things if they weren't true, right? We can interpret them this way or that way or whatever. They wrote them, right? And we have to deal with them. And if Rome's authority is Christ established or instituted by Christ, it's not just as simple as saying anything that you're saying, because now it's divinely instituted. It's part of the deposit of faith, and there's no human being that can take that away from it.
Yeah, that's what the truth of the faith does. It is. Okay, we've kind of gone back and forth. I do want to get to questions, because it's going on. We're like on a half an hour behind. So here's one. Father Boniface asked, did the early churches believe in Rome's supremacy? Is Rome using private judgment and thus overriding the other churches?
Is that for me?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like no, unless it was normal canonical order in times of heresy. So that's my answer.
So you're saying they did not believe in Roman supremacy?
I'm saying that when things were normal, Rome was the top church, and that there's prescribed functions in the canons for them, like what you're supposed to do. There's no doubt about that. But like for example, what's the word I'm looking for? Extrajudicial appeal. Like they could hear last case scenarios from all corners of the earth. Once all of the attempts to solve a problem legally or spiritually in terms of a heresy, it could fall to Rome if it wasn't resolved in the many levels that could have been there. That's what I. Huh?
It's kind of like the Old Testament with Moses, where you had like small groups and they have to deal with issues, and then the big issues that they can't deal with, they go to Moses and he has to deal with it.
Right. Yeah, like kind of like almost a Supreme Court. There is a specific term I'm looking for. I want to say extra legal something jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction. That's the term I'm looking for. So that would be what you definitely find in the canons of the church. That is there, and it was used quite a few times. So that would be my answer.
Okay. So My answer is from Saint Maximus. He specifically says that Rome has the supremacy over all churches, and then Stephen of Dor says the same thing. He says they preside over all others, right? He says, so that we may fly away and announce these things to the sea that rules and presides over all others. I mean, your sovereign and supreme sea, in quest of healing for the wound inflicted. And it says it has been accustomed to perform this authoritatively from the first and from of old on the basis of its apostolic and canonical authority, for the reason, evidently, that the truly great Peter, the head of the apostles, was deemed worthy not only to be entrusted alone out of all with the keys of the kingdom of heaven, for both opening them deservedly to those who believe and shutting them justly to those who do not believe in the gospel of grace. So specifically, it answers the question and says, yes, they did believe in Roman supremacy in the early church. That's literally what he just said.
Okay. Well, obviously, we're gonna probably we're gonna probably disagree on how to interpret that particular quote, but I'm gonna look for more questions.
Sure.
Because I know that a lot of people, a lot of comments. I am trying to scroll as fast as I can. I'm still halfway through, still seeing stuff about sexual unions. I'm starting to regret ever talking.
What have you done, Father? What have you done?
It's terrible. And I've awakened Alan Rule. He's mad I brought up the Dictatus Papae. You want to fight me on the Dictatus Papae, Alan? Come on in.
Yeah,
As you can see, Elijah has survived so far.
I think the Dictatus Papae is a nothing burger because it didn't do anything. It's not part of the church teaching. It's not part of the magisterium. We don't even know who wrote it in the first place.
Well, we do. We do. It was Hildebrand of Savannah in 1075. It's in his register. But more important, right? If we were just to take it as a document, like, hey, there's this document, like, secret conspiracy. But that's not what happened. What happened was he issued this. Many of the bishops left the papal court and appealed to the emperor. Then they held a synod in Brixen in 1080 and deposed Hildebrand. And they replaced him with Pope Clement III, who you guys know as anti-Pope Clement III. And a massive war throughout Europe went through to decide who was the real pope. I mean, this document is central to that. It's not like, something he wrote like, Dear Diary, these are my wishes. That's in the papal register, man. But I'm still going to find questions. Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's what I get for bringing up Alan. Anyways, back to Twitter with you. Let me see here. Looking for the questions. I know I saw some. That's another same-sex question couple. No, not doing that. What's this? Yeah, that's interesting. Wicked Wally points out this is not a question, but there were those okay with giving Roman acknowledgement of being distinguished for the seat of both Peter and Paul, but not a distinction carrying authority. I would argue appellate jurisdiction, which is still the way it works in the Orthodox model today, is some level of authority. So I would say that exists, but not the stuff of like you can depose bishops from across the sea. Question: would not the infallible papacy blossom into a dogma to ensure the word of God grow and build the church? Without it, would not the rest of the church fall apart on an all or nothing doctrine? I think that one's more for me, but yeah. I'd like to get yours first.
You're going to have to explain that. So would not I'm sorry, I'm not catching the question. Would not the infallible papacy blossom into dogma to ensure that the word of God grow and build the church? I see what he's saying. I think that is for you without it. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I really don't have anything to say. That's basically our stance, right? Yeah. As Catholics.
I would say dogmas don't blossom; they're proclaimed and they refine based on the original inspiration of the Holy Spirit given to the apostles and passed down through the church. Our theology doesn't have room for blossoming dogmas or what's that other one? Newman uses that. What's the development of doctrine? So yeah, we don't have room for that on our end. So all right. Sunrise asks, what does Elijah think of sedevacantism? Not a fan. So not a fan. Okay. Not a fan, yeah. Question: was Moses also one of many equals? I think that's for me. You can go ahead though and say you can point out one.
It's funny that he says that. That's literally what I was just saying. Moses was not one of many equals. He was the one that they were bringing issues to if they couldn't resolve it within their own group. Because there's like groups of 70 or whatever, and then they had a leader of that, and if that leader cannot resolve it, then they go to Moses, who resolves the problem for them. So he had more authority than all the groups that he had set up. So
Right.
and I look at that as like a foreshadow of what Christ is going to establish, which is the divine institution of the papacy.
And I would argue that it's a divine institution of the church, and that office does exist. The traditional thing would be, obviously, the first 1,000 years it was the papacy. After that, it fell to Constantinople. And sometimes it waffled between Constantinople and Moscow. And that in the 20th century, considering the massive destruction that we've seen, we look forward. I myself, I don't know if you're aware of this, but our synod's unique in that we use the Western Rite. But when we had our synod in Italy, there was even talk about possibly trying to restore the sees from Milan that were Roman suffragan sees, and if that would be successful, then eventually elect an Orthodox Pope of Rome. However, it kind of fell apart at the suffragan sees, so I don't think that we're ready for that.
Can I ask you a question, Father? Can I ask you a question related to what you just said?
Sure.
So, you asked me earlier, why is it necessary for the papacy? What makes it necessary, right? So my question to you is, since you hold to this apostolate thing, where Rome was the one, and then now it's Constantinople in the second millennium, since you hold to it, my question to you is, number one, if that's the case, what's the point of that apostolate? What is it called?
Jurisdiction.
What's the point of that if the one that's holding the see, that's answering the question that's being appealed to, like Rome or Constantinople, if they don't have infallible authority to decree something? Because in other words, they could get it wrong. So what's the point of Christ setting up something like that? And what is necessary if they don't have this infallibility? Then what's the point of having this apostolate? They can just like, oh, I don't agree with what you just said. I don't agree with your answer. So
which has happened in history. But what I would say is that the reason for that is because the complicated process by which legal and canonical trials go, and then go from the bishop to the metropolitan to the patriarch to either the papacy or whoever's the lead patriarch, is a way of establishing consensus. If a person is judged as a heretic in a diocese, but it doesn't spread, then usually it's relegated to that diocese and it dies out right then. And this has happened countless times in church history. But what usually happens, often with the famous ones that we know, is that it spreads to other dioceses. So the original excommunication is now insufficient because the other bishops have to excommunicate this individual or their followers, or a different set of followers doing the same thing. And this can spread. And when you're dealing with, for example, say like monophysitism, that spread hugely. And so unfortunately that had to go all the way up, which it did. Even to some degree, Nestorianism, that's the same thing is true also, because even that universal excommunication happened at the same time. The Far East was so large in terms of a Christian society. Bishop Enoch pointed out that if you were in the 7th century and you were a Nestorian, you probably would have thought you were the church because you would have been the largest church.
Right.
I mean, extending all the way to China. But, the vagaries of history as they are, my point is the purpose of the process being so cumbersome and having to go up all those levels is to ensure continuity. That the church itself is speaking in a united fashion. Sometimes it doesn't have to, but when it's dealing with soul-destroying heresy, yes, it does. So that would be my answer as to why it's necessary. But again, there's a spiritual aspect to it we can't see. And I haven't even described it. I'm just describing the most human, logical reasons for that. But ultimately, that is how the Holy Spirit ordained the church to work.
Right. I know. I get what you're saying. My point I was making, if that see could get it wrong, then really is no point for Christ to set up something to where somebody can appeal to someone that could get the question and they could get the answer wrong to the question. Like, so.
Well, you see, this is where I would argue that tradition ordained that as you get up further in the ranks, there were more and more protections to keep certain things from happening. I don't know how familiar you are with like old Roman kind of liturgical practice, but there was actually a practice, and I believe this was maintained, I want to say till the 9th century or 10th century, where by the time the Pope gave a sermon on the Sunday liturgy, there were a group of deacons that were placed around him with fans, and their purpose was precisely to listen for heresy. And if any occurred, just kind of to move the fan over the Pope to keep him from saying it and stop it. Like, they had literal safeguards to ensure that the Pope wouldn't speak heresy. That's not saying that the Pope, couldn't speak heresy, but the whole point is that they had gotten to that point where they felt that they needed to put this many safeguards to make sure that he couldn't speak heresy even if he tried physically. So that there's something to be said about that. I think that, that to me makes sense more than kind of the infallibility explanation, because to me, that means that they were so zealous for preserving orthodoxy in Rome that they would be willing to shut up a pope if he spoke badly on Sunday. That to me makes a lot more sense in terms of the Old Testament and Moses, so on and so forth, and how they presented it, than just assuming a charism. If that, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. But I'm saying that the gift that we're talking about, gift of infallibility, is, I'm reading from the quotes from the fathers, and they are saying that this gift exists in the Roman See, that the document that holds it. Even like Saint, what's his name? Not Saint, I don't know if he's a saint or not, but Stephen of Dore, he wrote the letter, like I was reading. He continues and he says, he's quoting Peter, "Do you love me? Shepherd my sheep." And then he says, and again, because he possessed more than all others in an exceptional and unique way, firm and unshakable faith in our Lord, he was deemed worthy to turn and strengthen his comrades and spiritual brethren when they were wavering, since providentially he had been adorned by the God who became incarnate for our sake with power and priestly authority over them all. So,
but now you see, this is where we run into trouble. And what I mean by that, and hold on, I want to take the old question off because I'm trying to find another question that had come up that actually relates precisely to that, which is when we start talking about the authority being Petrine, we run into the problem of Antioch and Alexandria, which were also Petrine. Are you claiming, therefore, that with these quotes being references to Peter as the rock, if one of those two sees happened to produce a similar claim or document in a similar time of heresy, you could apply those same Petrine quotes to those patriarchs? Is that, I would assume that does make sense to me.
Right, but these guys are, and this is why I'm specifically coming up with these quotes that are specific to Rome, right? Because Antioch and Alexandria was part of the church right now, right? They're going to Rome and they're saying you are above all the other churches because of Peter. You have what Peter had. Christ instituted that, right? If you can find a quote that's similar, that says similar things to, Antioch or Alexandria, are they saying that they are above all others, that their faith is unshakable?
Well, I mean, I know that one of the traditional titles of the Patriarch of Antioch was Judge of the Universe, or that might be Alexandria. But the point is that let me just see here.
I think that's the Oriental Orthodox say that today, but I don't know if
they could have taken the title. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to double check that. Yeah. But one thing I will say is that in this particular case, if I remember correctly, those churches were on the Monothelite side. So really, the only person you could refer to in that case as being the protector of the Orthodox faith, the divine faith, and really ruling as Peter would have been St. Martin.
In that particular case, you're right. Rome was like alone in being the Orthodox patriarchate. I believe it was Rome, right? But that's to my point, because again, Rome we don't believe is going to falter in the faith when it comes to
This, and,
binding the whole church to a heresy. We don't believe that could happen.
right, and this is where we fundamentally disagree.
Of course, we disagree. That's why we're having a conversation.
And it's fine. You see this as fundamentally because he's Roman. I see this as fundamentally because he's Orthodox.
Wait, hold on. I see this not because he's Roman, as because Christ promised that. It's a Christ promise. It's not something because I don't see it because Pope Francis is anything special, or just because Rome is anything special. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with what Christ instituted. Those are his words, and the fathers apply those words to the Roman bishop at their time.
They also, I don't know if you know this, they also apply those words to other bishops also, because that's part of their charge.
Yes.
And I mean, I don't know if we brought it up last. Huh?
It's all about context, right? If you apply it to a bishop.
And I would say, even I'd go so far as to say, I don't know if we brought this up in the previous discussion, but if you look at most pre-schism pontificals for the making of a bishop, not just a pope, but a bishop, it specifically talks about sharing in the ministry of the Apostle Peter.
Yes.
So that would be the responsibility of all bishops, not simply a pope.
That's
but that's my point. Now, in the case of St. Martin, that was, he was serving the church par excellence. And so what I would be saying is, because of his fidelity to orthodoxy and willingness to fight alone and be martyred, obviously that is the basis on which we see it.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you there. I think the responsibility to teach orthodoxy does not fall on the lap of one man, the Pope. It falls under the responsibility of all the bishops around the world in communion with the Pope. And that's what Lumen Gentium and Vatican II teaches, right? That's like you actually just quoted almost verbatim what Vatican II teaches on that matter. It's not just like the responsibility of the bishops is to guard, to govern, to teach universally with the Pope, right?
Well, here's my question. If they teach universally without the Pope, what's the issue?
So again, like I said in the beginning of the show, we don't believe that's possible. Providentially speaking, now I have to understand what you mean by your question, because the way I'm taking it is, can the bishops teach something that is in opposition to the Pope? And in that point,
no, I literally didn't mean that. What I literally meant, let us say, I don't know, the vision of Our Lady of La Salette comes true, and gigantic demon monsters destroy Rome, and there's no Pope anymore. There probably won't be, because it's guarded by demon monsters. Can the church still exist? I mean, I would say yes, but what would you say?
Of course. So you have, generally speaking, how the church works, but then you have instances where, like, for example, like the Pope dies, right? You don't have a Pope when the Pope is dead. The church does not cease to exist until a Pope is chosen, right? So of course the church would go on.
Now there are interregnum procedures in place, though.
Sure, but like none of those have any sort of like claim to infallibility or to, supreme authority over the bishops, right? But what I'm saying is, you have, generally speaking, me and you are arguing right now, or you and me are arguing right now on the papacy as it exists. You can have like examples that you could give me that if this happens, then what happens? Okay, those are extraordinary. We're not talking about that, right? That could happen, but we can deal with that.
Well, for us, the extraordinary became ordinary. Reader John asks, question, how does Elijah interpret the oaths of the popes that had to condemn previous heretical popes?
Well, popes can be heretical, so I don't see a problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see here. Looking for, that was the most closest, most recent question. If I've missed any of your questions, please put the question in again so I can just look at the bottom of the screen, because y'all made a lot of comments. And I realize that, yes, we're kind of arguing here very violently. It's been a bloody matchup. But, we've made it this far. And so let me see here. All right. So I don't see
as a debate or
Is it a discussion
or discussion? Or
I don't know.
yeah, I prefer this back and forth, Father. Like a
Yeah,
lot of people
exactly.
want to do debates where there's like 15 minutes opening statement, 10
What it
minutes.
really comes down to is as long as both parties are like they're kind of on an even keel and don't like want to be like I think it works. So we could do this for another 3-4 hours probably, although we have lives. Sunrise. What does Elijah think of the 879 Council and Saint Photius?
I don't know. I don't even know where to go with this question. I mean, I'd like something more specific. Like, does that mean like he went against the papacy?
No. I'll help.
Okay.
I'll give you the background because I don't know how much you know about this. 869, from our perspective, is considered illegal. The reason it's considered illegal is because of the Council of 879, which not only re-recognized St. Photius, but also, I think it was John VIII was the Pope. They recognized the, I want to say the Creed without the Filioque. They did the silver plates in St. Peter's. But more importantly, they reversed 869. And this was actually considered the authoritative Eighth Council until the Hildebrandian Schism, where they changed it. So, how do you think we still need to stick to 869, even though originally they stuck to 879?
I don't know. Honestly, this is not something that I've studied, that council. I think my studies go all the way up to 681.
Okay.
I haven't gone to 869 or 879.
Or 787. You're almost there, though.
Or 787. Yeah. So I haven't looked into those councils. I've looked into Ephesus, Chalcedon, 649, and then
Constantinople 3.
Those
so you're at the fifth, sixth council, and you're going up to the seventh. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Once you get to it, we'd love to get a follow-up from you on it.
Sure.
Okay. Matthew asks, what are both of y'all's qualifications for a council to be ecumenical? I.e., how does a council become an ecumenical, universally binding council? Very fascinating question and related to the last one. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my answer is it has to be, the Pope has to be either confirming or at the council decreeing with the, there's no number, like you can't say 80% of the bishops have to be there or 70%, but a heavy majority of the bishops of the church must attend the council, and the Pope as the head has to consent, and the members have to consent. And if you have one missing, whether it's the head or the members, then there is no consent, right? Sorry, go ahead. And I actually asked this question in my my X, Twitter, or whatever you want to call it these days. Is I said, can the Pope decree at an ecumenical council in complete opposition to the rest of the bishops? Meaning, is it his vote that matters alone, and all of them just have to agree with him? The answer is no. The Pope alone's vote does not get you a decree. In the name of the council, there has to be the Pope with the brother bishops acting together for the council to have a decree and be ecumenical and universally binding.
Hello, sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. To answer the question of what the qualifications on my end would be, as an Orthodox Christian, first off, there's a distinction between ecumenical and pan-Orthodox. Ecumenical can only be called that if it has the permission of the Christian Imperiate, which no longer exists. So really, after the Palamite synods, there can't be ecumenical synods because there was no Christian empire unless you count the Russians, who never called a council. So how does something become pan-Orthodox? It must be proclaim the Orthodox faith. It must be received by all the Orthodox people, and it must eventually be given. It must be by the Orthodox leadership, and eventually it must be given that sanction. So councils often, like the pan-Orthodox synods of like 1582 or Jerusalem, were not immediately called ecumenical the year after, although many people felt that they had ecumenical status. But within a decade, most of the church would recognize that it was pan-Orthodox, and then usually within 50 years, the rest of the church would as well.
So that's fascinating. I don't know if you're done, but I do want to ask you a question on that, just out of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
So, pan-Orthodox Ecumenical Council, authoritatively, which one is above? Are they equal?
Ecumenical are slightly above from an honorific status. A pan-Orthodox council has equal doctrinal weight. So, for all intents and purposes, a pan-Orthodox council is an ecumenical council. You just can't apply the name.
So it's just a name kind of thing. So it's just the same thing.
Because it's from the Ecumena, the empire, but there's no empire.
Okay. What about what is the council? The Synod of Jerusalem is at
1672. That's considered pan-Orthodox.
So do you believe that's authoritative? Like, do you have to follow that?
All Orthodox have to believe it.
Because there's some that don't think that they do.
They're not Orthodox.
Okay.
See, easy. Question: if popes can be heretical, can they be fallible in matters of dogma? I think that one's for you.
So yeah, in matters of dogma, it depends on what you mean. If what you're asking is binding the church universally to a dogma, then they cannot be fallible. They will always be infallible. But if you're talking about, like, if the Pope is, writing a book, like he wrote the book that came out with Pope Francis, there could be 500 heretical things in that book. So, but that deals with dogma, and that doesn't affect anything that we teach as far as what Vatican I taught. It did not say that the Pope is infallible in his private person or in all matters. He's infallible when he's binding the church to a specific teaching that has to do with faith or morals. So, yeah.
Great. Let me see here. If they adopt, I don't know. That's not a question. That's not a question. You're welcome, Sunrise. It's still not clear why Peter is eternally connected to Rome when at the institution of the papacy in Matthew 16:18, Peter had no connection to Rome. I guess Reader John followed that up with, technically Rome is the city of martyrdom of both Saints Peter and Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So since that seems to be the last comment / question, what do you think about that? Like, because technically Peter established a physical succession at Antioch, and by sending the disciple Mark to Alexandria, established a succession there as well. So and there are even feasts. I don't know if they're on the new Roman calendar, but they used to be on the old Roman calendar, like the chair of St. Peter, the chains of St. Peter, and these represented different sees.
Right.
So, I guess that's the perennial Orthodox question, which we ask, which is, if he died, since they died there, which one has more of a claim? Is it just because of the relics, or is it because, that Matthew's summing it up here. He asks, for Elijah of St. Peter founded both the seat of Antioch and Alexandria, then why is Rome specifically special?
Yeah, so I would say, number one, because the church fathers say so, right? That's patristics. We all agree that Rome is the head. It's the first see. I don't know.
The question is why?
Well, the church fathers looked at it because of what the gentleman before him said, because it's the see martyrdom of both Peter and Paul. So, and that's where Peter died. That's like his last see. So, he dies there, and the person that occupies the see after him holds that authority that Peter died and passed on. That's how I see it. But again, the fathers taught this. So regardless of what our answer is what the fathers taught.
Okay. Just because we're always broke and I have to ask, please support the channel. We at NFTU need your help. You can support us by subscribing or donating at nftu.net, on Give, Send, Go, or with crypto at nftu.net. So if you could do that, we really could always use your help. I did a stream, an emergency stream. I'm still very grateful. And you wouldn't be surprised, new emergencies come up almost every few hours. Okay. For no problem, Elijah. Chris Dabrowski asks, for the Meletian schism, did they ever bring up separation from the papacy as an issue? Was any side reprimanded for severing communion with the papacy? Did they both claim to be the papacy?
Did they both claim to be the papacy? I know I'm going to have to defer this to I believe Eric Ibarra just recently, within the last few months, wrote on this. It's a very, very messy situation. There's a lot involved, as Father knows. So I defer that, and I can find the article and put it on the comments if Chris wants me to do that. But I'm not going to do this question any justice.
I don't have much to say on it except this, that it wasn't so much that separation from the papacy was an issue, although Saint Jerome brings it up. In most cases, the approval of the papacy was used as a bludgeon between the various sides. Like one side would say, we have the papacy with us, and the other side would say, well, we have this see with us. Saint Jerome actually was originally a Roman monk. And so one of the most famous quotes that I hate to say it, but a lot of papal apologists use is one where he says, I know not Lucifer and I know not I cleave to the see of Peter. They don't realize he's being quite literal because there were so many divisions among the different groups. Because Lucifer wasn't the devil, it was Lucifer of Cagliari, who was one of the I want to say, yeah, he formed his own faction after breaking off from these the Paulinian schism. So the whole point is that Saint Jerome gets sick of everyone, and just basically writes a letter to the Pope and says, "Can I just be under you in Rome, even though I'm in Jerusalem, because these people are all crazy?" That got turned into this assumption that he was saying something great about the papacy when he was just saying really something horrible about everyone around him. What's this? Jeremy says, was this high language used by the fathers when speaking of Rome ever used by fathers later on when speaking of Constantinople? I feel like this is a question for me, but yeah, I would say yeah. Flowery and effulgent praise continues to be a thing in Byzantine writing into the 15th and 16th centuries. Do actually repair of bench? Okay, he's talking to someone in the chat. For you guys, wait, do you mean us guys or the people in the chat? Why does it seem that the fathers always interpret the rock in three different ways? You want to touch this one first, or?
Well, I think Scripture has multiple layers. A lot of times, the Saint Augustine talks about, and you can take it as Christ being the rock, Peter's confession, or Peter, and you have fathers who you can find fathers that teach all three of those things, either separately or all at the same time.
Okay, he clarified you and Elijah, so
Okay.
he means us. Okay.
Yeah. So, as far as why, I mean, it's the text doesn't tell us right who the rock is specifically. So you naturally are going to have disagreements on who the rock is, and sometimes you can have disagreements that are all reconciled with each other. So the rock can be Christ, it can be Peter, it can be his confession. So,
and in many cases, you'll find the fathers using all three, depending on what scripture they're exegeting. In some cases, the rock represents Christ, and in some cases, Saint Peter himself is the rock as being a disciple, a perfect disciple of Christ. And sometimes the rock is the confession because it is what makes us perfect confessors of Christ.
Right.
So that's how I would see it.
Yeah.
Let me see here. Reader John says, why do they consider Pope Clement III an anti-pope? This is because he basically was he created a separate line of popes, which within 20 years after his death was collapsed. But when he was elected, he actually held Rome, like he was the Pope in Rome. And what ended up happening, it's very interesting. There was a lot of politics, a lot of war, a lot of negotiations, but he was the holder of the last Orthodox traditions beforehand. He even tried to make peace with the, I want to say, with the Metropolitan of Bulgaria to see if they could work out a deal to restore the new great schism that had just happened. But it fell apart because Urban II of the Hildebrandian line offered the Byzantine emperor, well, lots of soldiers for this crusade thing. So the Clementine side lost out. In the end, though, he was considered a miracle-working saint, and many people, venerated his body, so many that when the Hildebrandians did take over and they noticed this cultus of Clement III, they knew they had to get rid of it, so they dumped his body in the Tiber. And it's only now recently I saw there was a recent it was a Vatican history of the popes. It was actually done in the past 10 years. It was like there was a presentation that they were talking about, and they went through all the different popes, and they included Clement III. And one thing they said is one of the questions that the presentation was asking was, should we still refer to him as an anti-pope? And I would say that you have to, otherwise Roman Catholicism becomes something completely different. Wayne asks, how can you claim this is flowery language when actions are done in reality which all align with these statements? For instance, the reunion of the Akakian schism, Pope Agapitus excommunicating Anthemius. Well, okay, I assume that's a question for me. And the answer to the question is not. I don't assume all of it is flowery language, but I recognize there is a difference between pleasantries and the juridical. And so when you separate those out, sometimes that meaning in certain documents can just be flowery language and have little to do with the actual discipline. Jeremy says, can Elijah respond to your answer about my question about high language used by fathers towards Constantinople? His whole case for Rome is this language used by fathers towards Rome.
I mean, there has to be specifics, right? I don't recall any talking about Constantinople in that sense that they talked about Rome. No one said that Constantinople is, has never fallen from the faith, but they do claim that about Rome. Mm-hmm. So I like specifics, right? Just generalities like this, which it is a very good question, an interesting question, but it needs to be brought with the quotes and say, what do you think about this quote? How does this not disprove what you're saying? And then we can talk about that. Because I'm not aware of any that I could think of, but it doesn't mean they're not out there.
Okay, let me take a look here. Let's continue just quickly looking. And again, let's see. Okay, yeah, that's not a question, so we're going to take that one off. You see. Father Joseph Sweden is an Orthodox priest. Yes, last I checked. This is a quote. Do you think St. Jerome was in error when he said the Pope could change the creed in Epistle 15? I assume that you're talking to me. I do not know that St. Jerome claimed this. I do not have that text in front of me. I can look and I can check, but I feel like you're going to be interpreting that. I feel like there's some extra reading in that may not be in the text.
No, he does actually say that explicitly. I don't think there's.
Do you have the text handy?
Man, I don't have it handy, but I can Google it and see if I can find it.
All right, we'll take a look. Yeah. We have to see the context.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting on that, Reader John asks, does Elijah watch any World Orthodox YouTube channels?
I don't know if you count the thing that you did. That was a 2-on-1.
or 3-on-1.
Or 3-on-1.
Who's counting?
I did watch that. And then I am planning on watching what you did earlier today.
Yeah.
So
okay, cool. Well, I guess that answers the question. I'm not World Orthodox, so the answer is no. Anyway, he only watches true Orthodox quality material. All right. While we're putting this up, let me see here. Okay. Oh yeah. What? So Sunrise wants to ask while we're waiting, what did Elijah think of the Friday stream? LOL. Which I guess the 2-on-1, the 3-on-1, whatever we call it.
Honestly, Father, I think so much of it just went above my head because I don't even know what the difference is between what's called true Orthodoxy and mainstream Orthodoxy or whatever you want to call it. Is it like a calendar thing, or I'm ignorant?
I'll put it to you this way: sure. You know how Roman Catholic traditionalism doesn't work because it doesn't have the papacy, and so it kind of becomes weird in of itself.
Yeah.
We don't have that problem because we don't have a papacy. So we just refer to the canons, the traditions, and from every major heresy in history, our view is we just rebuild everything. And so that's what we've done. People who are in the innovating jurisdictions don't like us, and that's fine. We like each other. And it's, so there's true Orthodox all over the world. You know about the problems with communism in the Moscow Patriarchate. We do not recognize the communists in the Moscow Patriarchate. We recognize the Catacomb Church that was in hiding. the Free Russians, etc. There are lots of them. There's millions of true Orthodox all over the world. Basically, we're Orthodox but consistent. Let me see. If you think fit, enact a decree, and I shall not hesitate to speak of 3 hypostases. Order a new creed to supersede the Nicene, and then whether we are Arians or Orthodox, one confession will do for us all. In the range of secular learning, hypostasis never means anything but essence. He clearly says here the Pope can enact a new creed of a universal level between Arians and other jurisdictions in the case of heresy or for reunion. I mean, it's St. Jerome, and I don't know how familiar you are with the writings of St. Jerome, but St. Jerome says some really sarcastic stuff. And I mean, like, what he's saying here is outlandish. He's saying, he's saying, Your Holiness, what you need to do is just write a whole new creed, and everyone's got to agree to it. Like that. First off, there's a part of me that thinks that that's really just really sarcastic language. I don't think he actually believes the Pope could or would do that, and I can't imagine. I think that if the Pope read that, he would have been thinking, "Oh, Jerome, like, what a kidder," or he would have been thinking in horror. What he was suggesting was ridiculous. I don't think that would have worked. The Arians were not just going to be like, "Hey, check out this new creed." Like that's nonsense. So he does love Pope Damasus. Maybe Pope Damasus would have gotten the humor and not been like, this monk in Jerusalem is crazy. That's my take. Okay. Mango Bango says crazy mental gymnastics here from Father Joseph. No, I think St. Jerome telling the Pope to create a creed that everyone's going to agree on is pretty out there, and I feel like that's probably a joke, because even the Pope would have been like, he can't be serious. See, he says, well, I don't think so, considering Pope Damasus professed the Filioque. Did he, though? And was a Vatican I forerunner, considering he also annulled synods like Rimini, which was his jurisdiction, he had the right to do. So that's, I think that's just me. I mean, Elijah, you may disagree, but I think that what he's requesting here is so far-fetched. I couldn't take that. I couldn't see the Pope taking it seriously. Let's see. What is Father Joseph's takes on St. Maximus' disputes with Pyrrhus, specifically the defense of Honorius and the Roman Church having supreme authority of binding and loosing? My take is it was a case of cosmic bad timing, because he definitely was supporting the office of the papacy, which was totally supporting Orthodoxy until Honorius. And I think that some of his points were valid, some of them were not. Constantinople, the new Rome, is the seat of the empire, the city adorned with divine honor and crowned with the splendor of the faith, St. John Chrysostom. Well, I mean, technically that's true. We know that also. Elijah, can you please respond to the above quote? Okay, I guess it's this quote, so please respond.
So Constantinople, the new Rome, is the seat of the empire, the city adorned with divine honor and crowned with the splendor of the faith. That's not equal to anything that I've read so far. I mean, that I've been reading so far. This is just, you can apply that to any see. You can apply that to bishops. It's not, hey, because Christ gave Peter the keys, now Rome occupies that see that Peter occupied, pass it on to the Roman popes, and the Roman popes cannot falter, and they're the head of the church. It's a Petrine prerogative, right? So that's what we're talking about. It's Christ instituted Petrine prerogative. You can find many quotes like this that Jeremy posted, many quotes like this. That's not anywhere near what I've read so far.
Yeah, my view is, unfortunately, there are florilegia that can be used for every single patriarchate. And so we have to be careful when we go use this sort of language.
Right.
Wayne, well, Father Joseph's Filioque edition is the same St. Cyril did in his formula of reunion with John of Antioch, where he himself said an elaboration isn't considering an addition per se. I'd have to look at the original text, but my guess is you're probably wrong. I'm going to just say that. It's not that I'm trying to be impolite. It's just that I've seen so many of these texts mangled that I don't automatically assume that interpretation is correct. Can you pull up that writing of Jerome? I'm curious. It is in the text, and I would have to get it. And how does Elijah interpret the departure of the old Catholics after Vatican I?
How does Elijah interpret the departure of the old Catholics after Vatican I? Well, the old Catholics today believe in woman ordination and a bunch of other crappy stuff. So they actually messed up by, I know you don't agree with that, by not joining with that. But I did read the backgrounds of Vatican I and the debates behind that. And the debates were really about whether the Pope can or can't decree without first polling the bishops explicitly. And I believe these guys were more Gallican, and they needed the Pope. They needed the decree to say that the Pope must poll the bishops in order for him to decree. But I mean, they're just plain wrong, and that's what we're discussing today. Father would agree with their interpretation and say that they're right. I would disagree with their interpretation and say they're wrong because of the things that I am saying right now during the whole show, the quotes that I'm reading and the logic that I'm using.
I'm trying to pull up the document. I can't just copy and paste it.
You talking about Jerome?
Yeah, if you had put it in the private chat, that's one thing, but I can't copy it if it's in the comment section. I think I screwed up just the letter. Hold on.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, let me see here. Yep, this is actually the same. This maybe is this the same letter? I think this is the same letter that I quoted before. No, this isn't, because this one doesn't. Let me see here.
Yeah,
I'm gonna read this. This is
kind of. So I know where that part is. It's chapter 4. So if you look at number 4, it's the first sentence.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "If you think fit, enact the decree, and then I shall not hesitate to speak of 3 hypostases. Order a new creed to supersede the Nicene, and then whether we are Arians or Orthodox, one confession will do for us all." That's what he says.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. It's actually a complicated letter, and actually, I hate to say this, it kind of supports what I feel it supports what I'm saying about sarcasm, not in the same way. It was probably, I thought it was more of a joke, but in this case, what he's basically saying is, look, these people are torn apart, and he's talking about the Arians here and this group here, so on and so forth. So if we could just write like a creed that they could all accept, and I'll accept that one, or maybe if I just don't have to accept any of them, I'll just take your advice on that. That's basically how I interpret that letter. I don't think Saint Damasus would have taken that seriously. I think he would have just been like, he's complaining again.
Now, remember when I said that Jerome talks about how there's one head of the church in order for schisms? Yeah. Right? So he does say that here in this letter in chapter 2. It says that my words are spoken to the successor of the fisherman, to the disciple of the cross.
Yeah, I've seen that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he says, as I follow no leader save Christ, so I communicate with none but your blessedness. That is, with the chair of Peter. For this I know is the rock on which the church is built. This is the house where alone the paschal lamb can be rightly eaten. This is the ark of Noah. Yeah,
but again, he's in effectively a non-canonical situation and justifying it, because he would normally be under Jerusalem's jurisdiction, and he was basically appealing, saying he didn't have to be because of the situation in the Jerusalem Patriarchate. My whole point is that it's a part of it comes from exaltation of the see, that's flowery language. A part of it comes from the fact that he lived there and knew Pope Saint Damasus and really seemed to prefer being there than where he was. So, I mean, I see it as a cry of existential frustration. Then I really do see it as it definitely has value in understanding, but it's not, I wouldn't say it doesn't have, considering who's saying it and why and the context, I don't see it as like, it's not a slam dunk for me that this is a proof of any extra jurisdictional letter.
So
Um,
I do have to say this, Father.
hmm,
The East will ask the Roman Catholics, show us a proof of papal infallibility or papal supremacy,
right.
the way Vatican I wrote. And then I believe this is one of them, and I believe I've given many of them so far today.
Hmm.
And then it's always, well, let's explain it away. So in
Well,
other words,
there's a reason. It's because when we look for clear proofs, they have to be clear proofs. And what I mean by clear proofs is that they mean what you say they mean, and that they don't necessarily mean what we could read and see something else in. That shouldn't happen. Like if you read, say, for example, from any of the ecumenical councils, any of the dogmatic statements, and I read it, I'm probably going to come to the same conclusions because it has a single meaning, if that makes sense. And
right.
Julio says, sorry if this was already discussed earlier, but the quotes will prove nothing to Father Joseph. He doesn't provide a burden of proof to be met or a bare minimum standard. You know what? I'll say that I'll agree. That's fair. We might have to establish a baseline before we can have a real discussion. Otherwise, we're just going to be speaking, for lack of a
That's
better word, from our echo chambers.
right. That's my point. It's like, what am I supposed to provide here that's going to show you, hey, Vatican I is patristic. It does come from the early church. The teaching is actually there in some form, some shape or form. Seems like
Yeah.
even when it's explicit, and even more explicit when Vatican I says about the Pope, when the early church fathers say things like that, it's like, all right, well, that's not what they really meant. Well, at the end of the day, it's like I can't provide anything if that's all we're going to be doing here.
Well, I think I think that is I think that's a fair critique. And I will say that perhaps we need to kind of work on where we can get to a common baseline on that. And I'm not against talking about it, but I guess since we didn't really establish that, from my perspective, I'm just speaking with my own Orthodox biases. You're speaking with your own Roman Catholic biases, and we haven't really come to a conclusion of where what is, for lack of a better word, um, incontrovertible. Like for example, I would list any of the statements of the seven and the eighth council as valid proofs. I would list any epistles that can be demonstrably shown to have produced the results said, um, and which I would say the closest that you might come would be Nestorius to Celestine, because that literally was letter request to the Pope, condemnation, which led to the council. However, of course, that can be explained in other ways, but that would be, to me at least, the closest to kind of a proof of papal action outside of their diocese. Does it still fall within appellate jurisdiction? It does, but so that's what. Okay, let me see here. Father Jeremy says, hold on. When did the Pope transition from the Vicar of Peter to Vicar of Christ? I want to say that was 11th century. I don't know if you have a different date.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Jeremy, Father Joseph. So, what exactly are your interpretations of the quotes Elijah is providing? You agree they're more than just flowery language that can be applied to every patriarch? Yeah, no, they're not always flowery language at all. In the case of Saint Jerome, he's using language he literally believes in. But the claims the ideas he's suggesting are kind of insane. Like, writing an overriding creed. I don't think what I mean by insane is that it's not a question of whether the Pope could or couldn't do it. It's a question of whether the Pope would even envision that as a real solution, as making a big tent for the heretics and the Orthodox. I don't think he would do that. But that's why I think that Saint Jerome was just expressing frustration. Wayne says, "Don't worry, Elijah. As John Jerusalem told the Caucasian Albanians and warned them, they bind evil and release from the shackles those who come with repentance and remorse, especially those who are heirs to his holy, primary, and honorable throne in the right faith, inherent in keeping with the Lord's dictum, as we just said." Okay. I don't see any other questions. So I think I don't know. I mean, we could talk about having another discussion, maybe setting more of a baseline, maybe go into the formalities, maybe do a formal debate. But I don't
No,
know.
thank you. I'm not a fan of. I like doing this better. I don't like to
Yeah,
be
this is fine
challenged.
with me too, but it
Yeah.
can be frustrating, and I get how it can be frustrating to
Yeah.
the audience also. So maybe we have to work on those dictates there. But in any case, I just wanted to let's just we'll cut it off there, and I will say thank you to everyone, to Elijah Yassi, our guest, to our listeners, to those who have questions and had comments, and to those who support our mission. Support the channel. We at NFTU need your help. Support us by subscribing or donating on NFTU.net, on GiveSendGo, or on Odyssey. We remember all of you in our prayers and thank you for all the support for NFTU. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Through the prayers of Holy Fathers with Jesus Christ, our God, mercy us and save us. Amen. Have a good night, everyone.